Some sequels didn't just disappoint. They took beloved classics and turned them into cautionary tales about how to ruin everything that made a game great. We're talking about franchises that defined the Sega Genesis, games that sold millions, titles that became system sellers and created lifelong fans. Then the sequels arrived and changed everything. Different gameplay, different developers, different design philosophies that fundamentally misunderstood what made the originals work. Sega thought Golden Axe 2 could coast on the original's success without innovation. Capcom thought Strider Returns could be outsourced to a budget developer. US Gold thought Strider fans wanted clunky platforming instead of fluid action. They were all wrong. Catastrophically, expensively, franchise-damagingly wrong. These aren't sequels that aged poorly. These are sequels that were terrible the moment they launched. Let's explore 8 Genesis follow-ups that promised evolution and delivered disaster. Number 8. Golden Axe to Golden Axe 2. When playing it safe kills everything. Picture this. It's 1989, and Sega releases Golden Axe as a Genesis launch title. Arcade-perfect beat-em-up action. 3 playable characters with distinct fighting styles. Magic attacks that summon dragons and lightning. Rideable beasts that let you trample enemies. It was glorious. Golden Axe wasn't just good, it was a system seller. Kids begged their parents for a Genesis just to play it at home. The game sold over 1 million copies and became synonymous with 16-bit gaming. Tight controls, satisfying combat, perfect difficulty curve. It was everything a launch title should be. Fast forward to December 1991. Golden Axe 2 launches with better graphics, more enemies, new magic attacks, and absolutely none of the magic that made the original special. The problems were immediate and obvious. The game looked worse. Despite being released 2 years later on the same hardware, Golden Axe 2 had washed out colors and less detailed sprites. The original had vibrant, colorful environments. The sequel looked muddy and generic. Somehow, the graphics had regressed. The level design was uninspired. The original took you through diverse locations: villages, turtlebacks, eagle rides, castle interiors. Golden Axe 2 had generic forests, caves, and castles. Nothing memorable. Nothing that made you say, wow. Just bland corridors filled with enemies. The difficulty was broken. The original had a perfect learning curve. Golden Axe 2 threw hordes of enemies at you with no strategy required. Just button mash until everything dies. The challenge was gone, replaced with tedious repetition. The magic system was worse. The original made you choose when to use magic strategically. Golden Axe 2 gave you so many magic pots that you could spam attacks constantly. The resource management was gone. The strategy was gone. And the worst part? The game was identical to the original. Same 3 characters, same basic moves, same enemy types with palette swaps. It felt like a ROM hack, not a sequel. Sega played it so safe that they forgot to add anything new. Reviews were mediocre. GamePro gave it 3.5 out of 5, calling it more of the same. Mean Machines gave it 80%, but noted it felt like an expansion pack, not a sequel. Players who loved the original felt cheated. They'd paid full price for what felt like Golden Axe 1.5. Sales were decent, around 630,000 copies, but only because the original had built such goodwill. Word of mouth was terrible. The franchise's momentum died. Today, Golden Axe is remembered as a Genesis classic. Golden Axe 2 is forgotten. When Sega released Golden Axe collections, fans complained that the sequel was included instead of Golden Axe 3, which at least tried something different. The failed promise. Building on the original's success with refined gameplay and better graphics would create the definitive beat-em-up experience. The reality. Playing it safe killed innovation. Worse graphics, bland level design, and zero new ideas made Golden Axe 2 a lazy cash grab that damaged the franchise. Number 7. Revenge of Shinobi to Shadow Dancer, the downgrade nobody asked for. November 1989. Revenge of Shinobi launches and becomes one of the Genesis's defining titles. Challenging ninja action, incredible music by Yuzo Koshiro, multiple paths through levels, boss fights against Spider-Man and Batman, yes, really, and gameplay that rewarded skill and memorization. Revenge of Shinobi was hard but fair. Every death taught you something. The level design was brilliant. Hidden routes, secret power-ups, branching paths. The game respected your intelligence. It sold over 1 million copies and proved the Genesis could deliver arcade-quality action at home. Then, 1991 happened. Sega released Shadow Dancer. The Secret of Shinobi, a port of the 1989 arcade game, and it was a massive step backward. The problems were fundamental. First, you had a dog. Your ninja companion could attack enemies and retrieve power-ups. Sounds cool, right? Except the dog was mandatory for progression. Certain enemies could only be killed by the dog. You had to wait for the dog to return before moving forward. The pacing was destroyed. The original Revenge of Shinobi was about fluid movement and precise timing. Shadow Dancer was about waiting for your dog to come back. The flow was gone. The level design was linear and boring. Revenge of Shinobi had multiple paths and secrets. Shadow Dancer was straight corridors with enemies placed randomly. No exploration, no discovery, just walk right and throw shurikens. The difficulty was cheap. Revenge of Shinobi was hard but fair. Shadow Dancer threw enemies at you from off-screen. You died to things you couldn't see coming. The challenge felt arbitrary instead of skill-based. The boss fights were forgettable. Revenge of Shinobi had you fighting bootleg Marvel and DC characters in epic battles. Shadow Dancer had generic ninjas and robots, no personality, no memorable moments. And the music was worse. Yuzo Koshiro's soundtrack for Revenge of Shinobi is legendary, one of the best video game soundtracks ever composed. Shadow Dancer's music was generic and forgettable. The atmosphere was gone. Reviews were mixed. Sega Pro gave it 80%, but most critics noted it felt like a downgrade. Players who loved Revenge of Shinobi were confused. Why did the sequel feel cheaper and less ambitious? Sales were poor compared to the original. Shadow Dancer sold around 500,000 copies, half of what Revenge of Shinobi achieved. The franchise lost momentum. Sega tried to course correct with Shinobi 3. Return of the Ninja Master in 1993, which returned to the original's formula and became another classic. But Shadow Dancer remained a black mark on the series. The failed promise. Bringing arcade gameplay and a ninja dog companion would create a fresh Shinobi experience. The reality? The dog-killed pacing, linear design removed exploration, and cheap difficulty replaced skill-based challenge. Shadow Dancer was a regression disguised as a sequel. Number 8. Strider to Strider returns, the outsourced disaster. Sega releases Strider for Genesis, a near-perfect port of Capcom's legendary arcade game. You're Hiryu, a futuristic ninja with a plasma sword, fighting through a dystopian world. Fast-paced action, incredible animation, memorable boss fights, and a soundtrack that defined cool. Strider was a technical showcase. The Genesis port captured the arcade's speed and fluidity. It sold well and became a fan favorite. Players loved the acrobatic combat and the feeling of being an unstoppable warrior. Then, 1990 happened again. US Gold and Tiertex, a budget developer notorious for terrible ports, released Strider Returns, Journey from Darkness. And it was a disaster. The problems were catastrophic. The controls were broken. The original Strider had tight, responsive controls. Strider Returns had input lag and floaty jumping. Hiryu felt like he was moving through water. The precision was gone. The animation was terrible. The original had smooth, fluid animation that made Hiryu feel alive. Strider Returns had stiff, choppy sprites that looked like a bootleg NES game. On Genesis hardware, in 1990, unacceptable. The level design was awful. The original had varied environments: Soviet cities, Amazon jungles, flying battleships. Strider Returns had generic industrial corridors that all looked the same. Boring, repetitive, uninspired. The difficulty was unfair. The original was challenging, but learnable. Strider Returns threw cheap deaths at you constantly. Enemies spawned on top of you. Platforming required pixel-perfect precision with broken controls. It was frustrating, not fun, and the music was an insult. The original Strider had one of the best soundtracks in gaming history. Strider Returns had generic, forgettable tracks that sounded like placeholder music. The atmosphere was completely destroyed. Reviews were brutal. Mean Machines gave it 39%. Sega Pro gave it 45%. GamePro called it a pale shadow of the original. Players felt betrayed. This wasn't a sequel. It was a cheap cash grab using the Strider name. Sales collapsed. Strider Returns sold poorly and damaged the franchise's reputation. Capcom distanced themselves from it, clarifying they had nothing to do with development. The game is now considered one of the worst Genesis titles ever made. It's a cautionary tale about outsourcing beloved franchises to budget developers who don't understand what made the original great. The Failed Promise. Continuing Hiryu's story with new environments and challenges would expand the Strider universe. The reality: outsourcing to a budget developer resulted in broken controls, terrible animation, and cheap difficulty. Strider Returns was a soulless cash grab that nearly killed the franchise. Number 5. Phantasy Star 2 to Phantasy Star 3. The downgrade that shocked fans. March 1989. Phantasy Star 2 launches and revolutionizes console RPGs. Massive world, complex story, detailed monster designs, challenging combat, and a shocking ending that left players devastated. It was ambitious, beautiful, and proved the Genesis could handle epic RPGs. Phantasy Star 2 sold over 500,000 copies and became one of the system's most beloved titles. The monster animations were incredible, detailed, fluid, intimidating. The story dealt with mature themes. It was a masterpiece. Then, April 1991 happened. Phantasy Star 3. Generations of Doom launched and changed everything. Literally. The game spanned 3 generations of characters. You made choices that determined which character you'd play next. Sounds innovative, right? Except everything else was worse. The monster designs were terrible. Phantasy Star 2 had detailed, beautifully animated creatures. Phantasy Star 3 had static, poorly drawn sprites that barely moved. The visual downgrade was shocking. Enemies looked like rough sketches instead of finished designs. The animations were gone. Phantasy Star 2's monsters had attack animations that made battles feel dynamic. Phantasy Star 3's enemies just flashed. No movement. No personality. Battles felt lifeless. The story was confusing. The generational system sounded cool, but resulted in a disjointed narrative. You'd invest in characters, then they'd be replaced. The emotional connection was broken. The shocking impact of Phantasy Star 2's story was gone. The difficulty was unbalanced. Phantasy Star 2 was hard but fair. Phantasy Star 3 had random difficulty spikes. Some sections were trivially easy. Others were impossibly hard. The balance was broken, and the music was forgettable. Phantasy Star 2 had an incredible soundtrack. Phantasy Star 3's music was generic and repetitive. The atmosphere suffered. Reviews were mixed. Some praised the generational system. Most criticized the visual downgrade and weak story. Fans of Phantasy Star 2 felt betrayed. This didn't feel like a sequel. It felt like a budget spin-off. Sales were decent, around 400,000 copies, but word of mouth was terrible. The franchise's reputation took a hit. Sega course-corrected with Phantasy Star 4 in 1993, which returned to the quality of Phantasy Star 2 and became another classic. But Phantasy Star 3 remained the black sheep, the sequel that forgot what made the series great. The failed promise, the generational system, would create an epic saga spanning centuries with unprecedented scope. The reality, terrible monster designs, removed animations, and a disjointed story made Phantasy Star 3 feel like a cheap downgrade. Innovation doesn't matter if the fundamentals are broken. Number 4. Streets of Rage. To Streets of Rage 3, when difficulty ruins everything. Wait, let's clarify. Streets of Rage 2 was perfect. It improved on the original in every way. Better graphics, better music, better gameplay. It's one of the best beat-em-ups ever made. But Streets of Rage 3? That's where everything went wrong. March 1994. Streets of Rage 3 launches in Japan as Bare Knuckle 3, then gets heavily modified for Western release. And those modifications destroyed the game. The problems were immediate. The difficulty was absurd. Streets of Rage 2 was challenging but fair. Streets of Rage 3 was punishing from the first level. Enemies dealt massive damage. You died constantly. The Western version was made even harder than the Japanese original. Sega of America thought Western players wanted extreme difficulty. They were wrong. The story was butchered. The Japanese version had a coherent plot. The Western version had mistranslations and cutscenes. The narrative made no sense. Characters' motivations were unclear. The graphics were worse. Despite being released 2 years after Streets of Rage 2, the third game had uglier character designs and less detailed backgrounds. The art direction was inconsistent. Some sprites looked great. Others looked rushed. The music was divisive. Yuzo Koshiro experimented with techno and house music. Some tracks were brilliant. Others were grating and didn't fit the game's tone. Streets of Rage 2's soundtrack was universally praised. Streets of Rage 3's was controversial. The pacing was broken. Streets of Rage 2 had perfect level flow. Streets of Rage 3 had branching paths that led to dead ends and bad endings. You could play through the entire game and get a terrible ending because you didn't meet hidden requirements. No explanation, no hints, just failure. And the fun was gone. Streets of Rage 2 was about feeling powerful and stylish. Streets of Rage 3 was about surviving cheap enemy patterns and memorizing boss attacks. The power fantasy was replaced with frustration. Reviews were mixed. Sega Pro gave it 90%, but many critics noted the difficulty was off-putting. Players who loved Streets of Rage 2 felt betrayed. This wasn't a sequel. It was a punishment. Sales were disappointing. Streets of Rage 3 sold around 500,000 copies, significantly less than Streets of Rage 2's 1.7 million. The franchise went dormant for 26 years. When Streets of Rage 4 finally launched in 2020, it ignored Streets of Rage 3's design philosophy entirely. It returned to Streets of Rage 2's balanced difficulty and fun-focused gameplay. The developers knew Streets of Rage 3 had gone too far. The failed promise. Increased difficulty and branching paths would create a deeper, more challenging beat-em-up experience. The reality, absurd difficulty, butchered story, and broken pacing made Streets of Rage 3 frustrating instead of fun. Difficulty doesn't equal quality. Number 3. Sonic & Knuckles to Sonic 3D Blast, the isometric disaster. November 1994. Sonic & Knuckles launches and perfects the classic Sonic formula. Lock-on technology with Sonic 3, massive levels, multiple playable characters, incredible music, and gameplay that balanced speed with exploration. It was the pinnacle of 2D Sonic. The classic Sonic games sold tens of millions of copies combined. They defined the Genesis. They were Sega's answer to Mario, and they were perfect. Then, November 1996 happened. Sonic 3D Blast launched with isometric graphics, flickies you had to collect, and gameplay that abandoned everything that made Sonic great. The problems were fundamental. The speed was gone. Classic Sonic was about momentum and flow. Sonic 3D Blast was about slowly collecting birds. You couldn't run freely. You had to stop, collect flickies, bring them to a portal, repeat. The pacing was destroyed. The isometric perspective was terrible. Classic Sonic had precise 2D platforming. Sonic 3D Blast had awkward depth perception. You'd miss jumps because you couldn't judge distances. The controls felt imprecise. The level design was boring. Classic Sonic had multiple paths and secrets. Sonic 3D Blast had linear corridors disguised as open areas. You walked through the same environments collecting birds. No exploration, no discovery. The flickies were tedious. You had to collect 5 birds per section. If you got hit, they scattered. You had to recollect them. It was busy work, not gameplay. The fun was replaced with chores, and the game was slow. Classic Sonic was about speed. Sonic 3D Blast was about careful, methodical progression. It felt like a puzzle game wearing a Sonic costume. The music was good. Richard Jacques composed an excellent soundtrack, but good music couldn't save broken gameplay. Reviews were mixed. IGN gave it 7 out of 10. GamePro gave it 3.5 out of 5. Critics praised the graphics, but criticized the gameplay. Players who loved classic Sonic hated it. This wasn't Sonic. It was a different game with Sonic's name slapped on. Sales were decent, around 700,000 copies, but only because it had Sonic's name. Word of mouth was terrible. Fans called it the beginning of Sonic's decline. Sega knew it was flawed. When they developed Sonic Adventure in 1998, they returned to speed-focused gameplay. Sonic 3D Blast's isometric perspective and flicky collecting never returned. The failed promise. Isometric 3D graphics would evolve Sonic into the next generation while maintaining classic gameplay. The reality, the isometric perspective killed speed and precision. Flicky collecting replaced momentum with tedious busywork. Sonic 3D Blast forgot what made Sonic fun. Number 2. Alex Kidd in Miracle World to Alex Kidd in the Enchanted Castle. The Genesis flop. Alex Kidd in Miracle World launches on Sega Master System and becomes the system's mascot. Charming platforming, rock, paper, scissors boss fights, vehicle sections, and gameplay that mixed action with light RPG elements. It was Sega's answer to Mario. Alex Kidd sold millions and was eventually built into the Master System's hardware. Every kid with a Master System played Alex Kidd. He was Sega's golden boy. Then, February 1989 happened. Alex Kidd in the Enchanted Castle launched as a Genesis launch title, and it was a complete disaster. The problems were everywhere. The graphics were ugly. Despite being on more powerful hardware, Enchanted Castle looked worse than Miracle World. The sprites were poorly drawn. The backgrounds were bland. The art direction was inconsistent. It looked like a rushed launch title, because it was. The controls were floaty. Miracle World had tight, responsive controls. Enchanted Castle had imprecise jumping and sluggish movement. The platforming felt wrong. The level design was terrible. Miracle World had varied environments and creative challenges. Enchanted Castle had generic levels with cheap enemy placement. You died to things you couldn't see coming. The rock, paper, scissors boss fights were worse. Miracle World made these fights tense and strategic. Enchanted Castle made them random and frustrating. Losing felt arbitrary instead of fair. And the game was short and easy. Miracle World had decent length and challenge. Enchanted Castle could be beaten in under an hour. There was no replay value, no secrets, no reason to come back. Reviews were brutal. Mean Machines gave it 67%. Sega Pro gave it 70%. Critics called it disappointing and rushed. Players who loved Miracle World felt betrayed. Sales collapsed. Enchanted Castle sold poorly and killed Alex Kidd's momentum. Sega realized they needed a new mascot. In 1991, Sonic the Hedgehog launched and replaced Alex Kidd entirely. Alex Kidd never recovered. The franchise died. Enchanted Castle was the last major Alex Kidd game. Sega's former mascot was forgotten, replaced by a blue hedgehog who understood what made platformers fun. The failed promise. Bringing Alex Kidd to Genesis with 16-bit graphics would establish him as Sega's premier mascot. The reality, ugly graphics, floaty controls, and terrible level design killed the franchise. Enchanted Castle was so bad it ended Alex Kidd's career. Number 1. Splatterhouse 2 to Splatterhouse 3. The formula change that killed horror. August 1992. Splatterhouse 2 launches and delivers brutal horror action. You're Rick, wearing the terror mask, fighting through nightmarish environments to save your girlfriend. Gore, atmosphere, challenging combat, and a perfect horror tone. It was Resident Evil before Resident Evil existed. Splatterhouse 2 was a cult hit. It pushed the Genesis's limits with graphic violence and disturbing imagery. Fans loved the horror atmosphere and satisfying combat. It sold well enough to justify a sequel. Then March 1993 happened. Splatterhouse 3 launched and changed everything. Different house layout, time limits, multiple endings, branching paths, and absolutely none of the atmosphere that made Splatterhouse 2 great. The problems were fatal. The time limits destroyed pacing. Splatterhouse 2 let you explore and soak in the horror atmosphere. Splatterhouse 3 gave you strict time limits. You had to rush through levels. The tension was replaced with stress. The horror was gone. The house layout was confusing. Splatterhouse 2 had linear progression through nightmare worlds. Splatterhouse 3 had a mansion with multiple rooms and branching paths. Sounds cool, but the layout was confusing. You wasted time backtracking. The flow was broken. The combat was worse. Splatterhouse 2 had weighty, satisfying combat. Splatterhouse 3 had faster but less impactful fighting. The hits didn't feel as powerful. The gore was toned down. The brutality was softened. The atmosphere was gone. Splatterhouse 2 was dripping with horror. Dark environments, disturbing enemies, oppressive music. Splatterhouse 3 was brighter and less scary. The mansion setting should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt generic, and the multiple endings were frustrating. You could play through the entire game and get a bad ending because you didn't save family members in time. No clear indication of what you needed to do. Just failure and disappointment. Reviews were mixed. GamePro gave it 4 out of 5, but many critics noted it felt less focused than Splatterhouse 2. Players who loved the original's horror atmosphere were disappointed. Sales were poor. Splatterhouse 3 sold significantly less than Splatterhouse 2. The franchise went dormant for 17 years. When it returned in 2010, the reboot ignored Splatterhouse 3's design entirely. The failed promise. Time limits, branching paths, and multiple endings would create a deeper, more replayable horror experience. The reality. Time limits killed. Pacing, confusing layout destroyed flow, and toned-down atmosphere removed the horror. Splatterhouse 3 forgot that horror needs time to breathe. The pattern is clear. 8 sequels that promised evolution and delivered disaster. Millions of dollars invested. Countless development hours, marketing campaigns that promised the next step forward, and every single one failed to understand what made the originals great. The pattern is clear. Playing it safe doesn't work. Golden Axe 2 changed nothing and felt like a lazy expansion. Outsourcing kills quality. Strider Returns was developed by a budget studio that didn't understand the franchise. Difficulty doesn't equal quality. Streets of Rage 3 was punishing instead of fun. Genre changes alienate fans. Sonic 3D Blast abandons speed for bird collecting. Downgrades destroy trust. Phantasy Star 3's terrible monster designs shocked fans. Time limits kill atmosphere. Splatterhouse 3 rushed players through horror that needed pacing. Every sequel made the same mistake. Assuming change meant improvement. But sometimes the original was already perfect. Golden Axe didn't need to play it safe. Strider didn't need to be outsourced. Streets of Rage didn't need to be punishingly difficult. Sonic didn't need isometric graphics. Phantasy Star didn't need worse monster designs. Splatterhouse didn't need time limits. The lesson: evolution isn't always improvement. Sometimes the best sequel is the one that understands why the original worked and builds on that foundation instead of tearing it down. If you played any of these sequels and felt betrayed, you weren't wrong. The developers were. They had lightning in a bottle and decided to change the bottle. Drop a comment telling me which Genesis sequel disappointed you most. Mine was Sonic 3D Blast. I spent hours collecting flickies, wondering when the game would let me actually go fast. It never did. Thanks for watching, and remember, the next time a beloved franchise announces a sequel that reinvents everything, remember Golden Axe 2, Strider Returns, and Splatterhouse 3. Reinvention usually means they forgot what made the original great.